cat meowed every day at exactly 11:42 p.m. When they decided to investigate, they were shocked. Barbara woke up startled by the sharp sound cutting through the silence of the night. It was the 5th night in a row this had happened, always at the exact same time. She glanced at the digital clock on her nightstand, 11:42 p.m. The meowing echoed through the narrow alley between the old buildings in downtown Chicago, where she had lived for 30 years. But this time, something different made her get out of bed. The sound seemed more desperate, more urgent. "I can't take this anymore," Barbara murmured, slipping on her slippers. The 67-year-old retiree walked down the stairs of the small residential building, determined to find out where the sound was coming from. On the ground floor, she ran into her neighbor Mildred, a 72-year-old woman who ran the small corner grocery store. "Did you hear it too, Barbara?" Mildred asked, holding a flashlight. "Every single night at the same time. This isn't normal." The two women followed the sound to the side alley, where trash cans were piled against the exposed brick wall. There, sitting on the cold concrete, was a short-haired grey cat with yellow eyes that glowed in the dark. The animal meowed with an intensity that seemed to carry all the anguish in the world. "Poor thing must be hungry," Mildred said, stepping closer. But Barbara noticed something odd. The cat didn't look thin or mistreated. On the contrary, its fur was clean and shiny, and it wore a faded blue collar. "It has an owner, Mildred. Look at the collar." When Barbara bent down to check for any identification, the cat abruptly stopped meowing. It stared straight at her, as if trying to communicate something important, then ran a few feet ahead and stopped, looking back. "I think it wants us to follow it," Mildred whispered. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting. Now, continuing." The two women exchanged hesitant glances, but curiosity won out. They followed the feline through the neighborhood alleys, passing rusted iron gates and graffiti-covered walls. The cat guided them with precision, stopping occasionally to make sure they were still behind. After 10 minutes of walking, they reached an old 2-story house on Maple Street. The house, once grand, now showed clear signs of neglect. Dusty windows, an overgrown yard, broken roof tiles. The cat climbed the 3 steps to the entrance and began frantically scratching the wooden door, meowing even more desperately. "Barbara, this doesn't feel right," Mildred said, gripping her friend's arm. "I'm scared too, but what if someone inside needs help?" Barbara knocked on the door. Silence. She knocked again, harder. Nothing. Then she noticed the door was slightly ajar. With a gentle push, it creaked open on rusty hinges. The inside of the house was dim, lit only by the faint light seeping through the cracks in the windows. The cat darted inside, disappearing into the darkness. "Is anyone there?" Barbara called out. A weak moan came from upstairs. The two women locked eyes, their hearts racing. Mildred turned on the flashlight and together they climbed the creaky wooden stairs. In the main bedroom, they found a sight that left them frozen. Lying on the bed was an elderly woman, seemingly unconscious. The grey cat was beside her, gently licking her hand. Barbara rushed to the woman and checked her pulse. It was weak, but she was still alive. "Mildred, call an ambulance, hurry!" As Mildred ran downstairs, Barbara took a closer look around the room. There were scattered pills on the nightstand, unpaid bills piled up, and a framed photo of the woman when she was younger, smiling next to a man. The woman began murmuring something incomprehensible. Barbara held her hand, trying to calm her. "Don't worry, help is on the way." Minutes later, the sound of an ambulance siren broke the silence of the early morning. The paramedics quickly came up and began examining the patient. "How long has she been like this?" asked one of the responders. "We don't know. Her cat brought us here," Barbara explained. The paramedic raised an eyebrow, skeptical, but said nothing. They placed the woman on the stretcher and took her to the ambulance. Barbara insisted on going with her, while Mildred stayed to care for the cat. At the hospital, after hours of waiting, a young doctor named Dr. Michael came to speak with Barbara. "Are you related to her?" "No, doctor, I'm just a neighbor who—" "It's a long story." "Well, the patient's name is Dorothy Williams, 74 years old. She had a mild stroke, probably a few days ago, if she hadn't been found in time. Barbara shuddered. The cat had saved its owner's life. Does she have family? According to her records, she has a son who lives in Cleveland. We've tried contacting him but haven't reached him yet. Barbara spent the night at the hospital, keeping watch over this stranger fate had placed in her path. By morning, Dorothy finally opened her eyes. Where is Smokey?" were her first words. "Is that your cat's name?" "He's fine. My friend is taking care of him." Dorothy began to cry. He saved me. Every day at 11:42 p.m., that was the time my husband Frank came home from work. Smokey learned to wait for him at that hour. Even after Frank passed 3 years ago, the cat kept waiting. Barbara felt her eyes well up. The animal's loyalty was heartbreaking. But this time, he did something different. He went out to get help. "Animals know when something's wrong," Dorothy said weakly. "I've lived alone since Frank left. My son. We had a fight years ago. He wanted to put me in a nursing home. I refused. We never spoke again." In the following days, Barbara and Mildred took turns caring for Dorothy at the hospital. The news of the heroic cat spread through the neighborhood, and soon other neighbors began visiting the patient. But not everything was smooth sailing. Dorothy's son, Richard, finally showed up, and he was far from pleased. "Who are you?" he snapped as he entered the room. "We're the neighbors who saved your mother," Barbara replied, trying to stay calm. "Saved? You broke into her house. I'm suing both of you." Dorothy, still weak in bed, tried to intervene. "Richard's son. They helped me." "Shut up, Mom. You're in no state to make decisions. I'm taking you to Cleveland." "I won't go," Dorothy shouted with what little strength she had. "Yes, you will. I've already talked to the doctor. As soon as you're discharged, you're coming with me. And that old cat is going to the first shelter I find." Barbara felt her blood boil. How could anyone be so heartless? "You can't do that. That cat saved her life." "So what? It's an animal. My mother needs professional care, not pets." Richard stormed out, slamming the door. Dorothy began crying desperately. "He's going to take Smokey away from me. He's the only living memory I have of Frank." Barbara squeezed her hand firmly. "Don't worry. We'll figure something out." But how? Richard had legal rights as the only son, and Dorothy, weakened by the stroke, couldn't fight him. That night, Barbara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of a solution, but nothing seemed possible. Then Mildred knocked on her door. "Barbara, I have an idea. What if we proved Dorothy can live on her own?" "How?" "We could organize a support network. The neighbors can take turns helping her. That way, her son wouldn't have a case." It was a good idea, but Barbara knew it wouldn't easy. The next day, the two began going door to door explaining the situation. To their surprise, many neighbors were willing to help. Mrs. Betty, the neighborhood seamstress, offered to do the shopping. Mr. Henry, the retired man who lived across the street, said he could check on Dorothy every day. Even Tyler, the young nursing student, volunteered to help with the medications. But when they presented the idea to Richard, he laughed scornfully. "You really think I'll leave my mother in the hands of a bunch of nosy old folks?" "We're not nosy," Mildred retorted. "We're a community." "Community? This is Chicago, Ma'am. Everyone minds their own business." "That's where you're wrong," said Barbara. "It may be a big city, but our neighborhood still holds on to values of solidarity." Richard shook his head, annoyed. "Do whatever you want. When she's discharged, I'm taking her to Cleveland, and if you try to stop me, I'll call the police." The situation seemed hopeless. Barbara and Mildred left the hospital disheartened. That's when they ran into Dr. Michael in the hallway. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing the argument. Maybe I can help." "How, doctor?" "Well, as a physician, I can certify whether the patient is mentally capable of making decisions about her own life. And from what I've seen, Mrs. Dorothy is perfectly lucid." A glimmer of hope emerged, but Barbara knew it wouldn't be enough. Richard seemed determined to take his mother, no matter the cost. In the following days, the situation grew even tenser. Richard hired a lawyer and began legal proceedings to gain guardianship of his mother, claiming she couldn't care for herself. Dorothy grew more depressed each day. She barely ate, barely spoke. She only asked for Smokey. "We need to do something soon," said Mildred. "She's wasting away from sadness." That's when Barbara had a risky idea. What if we brought Smokey to visit her? In the hospital? They won't allow it. We could try talking to the administration, explain the situation. To their surprise, the nursing supervisor, a woman named Jennifer, was understanding. "My grandmother also had a cat. I know how important that bond is. I'll see what I can do." The next day, they secured special permission for a therapeutic visit. When Mildred entered the room with Smokey in her arms, Dorothy's face lit up. "My boy, my Smokey!" The cat jumped onto the bed and curled up beside her, purring loudly. It was the first time in days Dorothy had genuinely smiled, but the joy didn't last. Richard stormed into the room like a hurricane. "What kind of nonsense is this? A cat in the hospital?" "Calm down, sir," said Nurse Jennifer. "It's an authorized therapeutic visit." "Authorized by whom? I want to speak to the director now." The commotion was so intense, security had to be called. Richard left shouting threats, saying he'd sue the hospital too. That night, Barbara received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Michael. "Mrs. Barbara, I've discovered something important about Mrs. Dorothy's son. Can we meet early tomorrow?" The next day, in the hospital cafeteria, the doctor revealed what he'd learned. "A colleague from Cleveland told me Richard is in serious financial trouble. His business is on the verge of bankruptcy." "What does that have to do with Dorothy?" "The house she lives in is worth a small fortune. It's one of the last original houses in the neighborhood. If he gets guardianship of her..." Barbara understood immediately. Richard wasn't worried about his mother's well-being. He wanted to sell the house. "We need to tell Dorothy. Be careful. This could make her emotional state worse." Barbara knew the doctor was right, but they couldn't let Richard take advantage of the situation. She decided to talk first with Mildred and the other neighbors. The news caused outrage in the group. "What a heartless son," exclaimed Mrs. Betty. "We need to stop this," said Mr. Henry. But how? Richard had the law on his side, and the guardianship process was moving quickly. That's when Tyler, the nursing student, had an idea. What if we documented everything? The visits, the care, the support network. We could create a dossier showing that Mrs. Dorothy has all the support she needs to live at home. It was a good strategy. In the following days, the group organized themselves. They set up visiting schedules, recorded everything with photos and videos, and collected testimonies from local shopkeepers who had known Dorothy for years. But Richard didn't sit still. He hired a second lawyer and intensified the pressure. He even tried to block visits to the hospital. The situation reached a breaking point when Dorothy suffered such a severe anxiety attack that she had to be sedated. The doctors warned that the stress could trigger another stroke. Barbara was desperate. She felt she was failing the woman fate had placed in her path. Then, something unexpected happened. One morning, an elegant woman in her 50s appeared at the hospital asking for Dorothy. It was Pamela, an old friend who had moved abroad 20 years earlier. "I heard what happened through a mutual friend. I came as soon as I could." Pamela was shocked to learn about Richard's actions. "I knew him as a child. He was already a difficult boy, but this is unforgivable." "Can you help us?" asked Barbara, hopeful. "I'll try. Dorothy was like a sister to me. I won't let them do this to her." Pamela was a lawyer with experience in family law cases. She immediately offered to represent Dorothy pro bono. "First, we need a full psychological evaluation to prove she's capable of making her own decisions." The evaluation was scheduled for the following week. Meanwhile, Pamela studied the case thoroughly and discovered some irregularities in Richard's lawsuit. He lied about several things. He claimed his mother lived in unsanitary conditions, which is false. He said she had no support, which is also untrue. Things began to improve, but Richard didn't give up. In a dirty move, he obtained a court order banning Smokey from visiting Dorothy, citing health risks. Dorothy was devastated. She stopped eating again and barely responded to anyone. Barbara and Mildred took turns by her side, trying to cheer her up, but it was useless. "She's giving up on life," said Mildred, tears in her eyes. That's when Barbara made a drastic decision. She contacted the local press. The story of the cat who saved his owner touched a reporter's heart, and she decided to run a feature. When the story aired, the response was immediate. Dozens of people called the station offering support. On social media, the hashtag #SaveSmokey went viral. Richard was furious. "You've turned my private life into a circus." "You're the one who turned your mother's life into a nightmare," Barbara shot back. The public pressure was so great that the hospital allowed Smokey's visits again. When the cat entered the room, Dorothy seemed to come back to life. "My boy, I thought I'd never see you again." The psychological evaluation confirmed what everyone already knew. Dorothy was perfectly lucid and capable of making her own decisions. But Richard wasn't done. In a final move, he claimed the house where his mother lived needed urgent repairs and that she couldn't afford them. It was true the house needed work, but nothing that made it uninhabitable. That's when the community showed its strength. They organized a volunteer effort. Masons, electricians, painters, all neighborhood residents offered to do the repairs for free. "It's the least we can do," said Mr. Bob the mason. "Mrs. Dorothy always helped everyone around here." For a week, dozens of volunteers worked on the house. They fixed the roof, painted the walls, and tidied up the garden. The transformation was remarkable, but the legal battle continued. Richard had managed to delay the judge's final decision. Pamela was worried. He's buying time. The longer Dorothy stays in the hospital, the weaker she gets, and that might work in our favor. Barbara then had another idea. What if they could get Dorothy medically discharged? If she could return home, she'd regain strength to face her son. Dr. Michael was consulted and agreed that, medically speaking, Dorothy could be discharged, as long as she had proper care at home. "We can arrange that," said Barbara. "Tyler, the nursing student, can check on her daily." Everything was set for the discharge when Richard showed up with a new injunction, preventing his mother from leaving the hospital until the final court ruling. That was the last straw. Dorothy broke down in such heavy sobs that she had to be sedated again. "I just want to go home. I just want to be with my cat." Barbara felt a surge of anger. How could a son be so cruel? That night, she and Mildred talked at length. "We need to do something more drastic," said Mildred. "What do you suggest?" "What if we looked for Richard's father, Dorothy's ex-husband?" Barbara was surprised. Dorothy had only mentioned her ex-husband once, saying he'd left when Richard was a teenager. "But we don't even know where he is." "We can try to find out." The two began a full-fledged investigation. They spoke to old neighbors, searched public records, until Mrs. Betty remembered an important detail. "Howard. He moved to Tampa, opened a small inn there. My cousin stayed there once." With that information, it wasn't hard to track him down. Barbara called and explained the situation. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence. "Dorothy is sick?" Howard's voice sounded choked. "Yes, sir. And your son is trying to institutionalize her against her will." Richard was always troubled. "That was part of why we divorced. I tried to stay in touch, but he completely shut me out." "Could you help?" "I'll be in Chicago tomorrow." When Howard showed up at the hospital, it was a shock to everyone. Richard turned pale. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see your mother and to stop you from doing this cruel thing. You have no right. You abandoned us." "I didn't abandon anyone. You cut me out of your life, but I won't let you hurt Dorothy." The argument grew heated. Richard shouted accusations, but Howard stayed calm. "Son, I know you're in financial trouble. Why didn't you come to me? I could have helped. I don't need your help." "But you need your mother's house?" Richard fell silent, exposed. Howard approached Dorothy, who watched him with a mix of surprise and emotion. "Hi, Dottie. I'm so sorry for everything." "Howard, after all this time?" The two talked for a long while. Howard explained he'd always wanted to stay in touch, but respected her wish to distance herself after their messy divorce. "But I'm here now, and I won't let anyone hurt you." Howard's presence changed everything. He had resources and hired a top lawyer to help Pamela. Richard found himself cornered, But he wasn't defeated yet. In a final, desperate move, he claimed his mother was being manipulated by greedy strangers. "These people are taking advantage of her," he shouted in court. Then something moving happened. One by one, neighbors began filing into the courtroom. They came to testify for Dorothy. Mr. Henry told how she had cared for his sick wife. Mrs. Betty remembered the food baskets Dorothy used to distribute at Christmas. Tyler talked about the free knitting classes she offered to young people in the community. "Mrs. Dorothy is the heart of our neighborhood," said Mildred. "Now it's our turn to take care of her." The judge listened carefully to all the testimonies. When it was Dorothy's turn to speak, she stood up with difficulty, supported by Barbara. "Your Honor, I just want to spend my final years in peace in my own home with my cat. I'm not asking for much. I have friends who look after me. My son, I love him, but he's changed. He's not the boy I raised anymore." Richard lowered his head, perhaps moved by his mother's words. The judge called for a recess to make a decision. Those were the longest hours of Barbara's life. When they finally returned, the verdict came. "Considering all the facts presented, I rule that Mrs. Dorothy Williams is capable of making her own decisions and will remain in her residence with the support of the care network described." The relief was universal. Dorothy cried with joy. Richard left the room without a word. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 2 days later, Dorothy was finally discharged. Her return home was emotional. The neighbors had organized a small welcome party. Colorful balloons decorated the entrance, and a banner read, "Welcome back, Mrs. Dorothy." But the most touching moment was when Smokey saw her. The cat ran toward her, meowing loudly, and leaped into her arms. "My savior," Dorothy whispered, hugging him. Life slowly returned to normal. The support network worked perfectly. Each neighbor did their part, and Dorothy was never alone for long. But there was still an open wound. Richard. He had disappeared after the trial, and Dorothy suffered from the distance with her son. "I forgive him," she'd say. "I know he was desperate." Barbara admired that woman's capacity for forgiveness, but she knew reconciliation wouldn't be easy. A month later, on a rainy afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Richard. He looked worn out, thinner, his eyes red. "Can I come in, Mum?" Dorothy didn't hesitate. She opened her arms to her son. "Always, my boy, always." Richard confessed he'd lost everything. His business went bankrupt, his wife asked for a divorce, his friends vanished. "I was blind, Mum. I thought money would fix everything, but I lost what really mattered. You didn't lose it. I'm here." The reconciliation was slow and difficult. Richard had to rebuild the lost trust, but with patience and love, mother and son grew closer again. Howard also started visiting regularly. The three began building a new relationship based on forgiveness and understanding. "That's what family is," Dorothy would say. "We fight, we drift apart, but love always finds its way back." Smokey watched everything with his wise yellow eyes. He still meowed at 11:42 p.m., but now it was a different meow. No longer desperate, but watchful, as if to say, "It's okay, I'm here." Barbara and Mildred became part of Dorothy's extended family. The three women spent entire afternoons chatting, knitting, and sharing memories. "You know," Dorothy said once, "I thought my life was over when Frank left. But look at all the good that's happened since. How many friends I've gained. The house, once quiet and gloomy, was now full of life. Neighbors came and went, and there was always fresh coffee and homemade cake on the table." Richard found a modest job and did what he could to help his mother. His relationship with his father also improved gradually. "I wasted so much time being angry," he said one afternoon while helping his mother in the garden. "What matters is that you're here now," Dorothy replied, but life still had surprises in store. During a routine checkup, Dr. Michael discovered that Dorothy would need minor heart surgery. Fear crept back in. Richard panicked. "What if something happens? What if—" "Calm down, son, I'll be fine. I have so many reasons to live." The community rallied once again. They organized a prayer chain and took turns at the hospital during the surgery. When Dorothy woke up from anesthesia, the first thing she saw was Richard's face. "Were you here the whole time?" "Where else would I be, Mum?" Her recovery was quick. Dorothy's heart, strengthened by all the love around her, responded well to treatment. But there was another matter to settle. Howard, who had extended his stay in Chicago, needed to return to Tampa. "I have a proposal," he said during dinner. "Why don't you spend some time at the inn?" The sea air would do Dorothy good. Richard hesitated, but Dorothy was excited. "It's been so long since I've seen the ocean." They decided to take a 2-week trip. But there was one problem: Smokey. "He's coming with us," Dorothy declared. "I'm not leaving without my guardian." The trip was an adventure. Smokey, who had never left the neighborhood, was fascinated by the world outside. In the car, he stuck his head out of the carrier, watching everything. In Tampa, Howard's Inn was a cozy place right by the beach. Dorothy spent hours sitting on the porch, watching the ocean with Smokey in her lap. "You know," she said to Barbara, who had come to visit, "I thought my story was over." But it was just a new chapter beginning. Richard and Howard used the time to reconnect. They fished together early in the morning, talking about life. "I'm sorry for all those lost years, Dad." "They weren't lost, son. They were lessons. Look where we are now. Back in Chicago, life went on as usual, but now there was more lightness, more joy." Dorothy started a knitting group in the neighborhood, teaching young mothers how to make baby clothes. Richard met Sarah, a volunteer teacher at the community center. Their romance blossomed slowly, with Dorothy's blessing. "She's a good girl," she said. "Her heart's in the right place." Smokey approved too. He purred whenever Sarah came over. Time passed. Dorothy celebrated her 75th birthday with a big party in the backyard. The whole neighborhood came. Richard gave an emotional speech. "My mother taught me that family isn't just blood. It's who stands by you when you need them most. Thank you all for being our family." Barbara and Mildred hugged, moved. They had started by following a cat one early morning and ended up gaining a family. But the story still had more surprises. One ordinary afternoon, Smokey started acting strangely. He meowed insistently and tugged at Dorothy's skirt. "What is it, sweetheart?" The cat led her to the back room where they kept old things. There, behind a box, was a young, skinny, frightened cat with 3 newborn kittens. "Oh my goodness," Dorothy exclaimed. The cat had gotten in through a hole in the roof and given birth there. She was weak and needed help. Dorothy didn't think twice. She cared for the cat just as she had been cared for. She fed her, took her to the vet, and looked after the kittens. "That's how life is," she told Richard. "You receive kindness and pass it on." The cat, named Hope, and her kittens were adopted by neighbors, but not before spending time recovering at Dorothy's house. Smokey proved to be an excellent foster father, caring for the kittens as if they were his own. "He learned from the best," Mildred joked. "Saved you, now saves others." The story of the heroic cat continued to inspire the neighborhood. They started a campaign to care for stray animals, with Dorothy as the patron. "Every animal deserves love and care," she said at the meetings. Richard became fully involved with the community. He used his business experience to help local small business owners. The bankruptcy, which seemed like the end, had been a new beginning. "I lost money, but I gained something far more valuable," he would say. Sarah and he got engaged on a Sunday afternoon, with Smokey as the ring bearer, the jewelry tied to his collar. Howard would visit them monthly. The family, once fragmented, was now united by bonds stronger than blood. During one of these visits, he brought a surprise. He had sold part of the inn and wanted to invest in the neighborhood. "I want to create a community center for seniors," he announced. "A place where people like Dorothy can gather, do activities, never feel alone." The idea was met with enthusiasm. Richard volunteered to manage the project, Sarah to coordinate educational activities. "It'll be called Smokey House," declared Dorothy, "in honor of the little hero who started it all." The construction of the center mobilized the entire neighborhood. Everyone contributed however they could, with labor, materials, ideas. Barbara coordinated the volunteers, Mildred organized fundraisers, Tyler created a preventive health program. The opening day was emotional. The mayor attended, and the press covered the event. But the most touching moment was when Dorothy cut the ribbon holding Smokey in her arms. "This place is proof that love can transform everything," she said. "It started with a meow in the early morning, and look how far we've come." The center became a model for senior care. It offered physical activities, craft workshops, psychological support, all free of charge. But the most important thing was the sense of community. Seniors who lived in isolation now had a place to go, friends to talk to, activities to join. Mrs. Mary, an 80-year-old widow who lived alone, summed it up well. "I used to wake up with no reason to get out of bed. Now I can't wait to come here." Smokey became the center's official mascot. He spent his days wandering among the seniors, receiving affection, distributing therapeutic purrs. "He knows who needs comfort," Dorothy observed. And it was true. The cat had a sixth sense for detecting sadness or loneliness, always appearing at the right moment. Dorothy's life had completely transformed. From a lonely existence, she became the heart of a vibrant community. Richard and Sarah married in a simple ceremony in the backyard. Smokey, of course, was the best man. "Who would have thought," Dorothy whispered to Barbara during the celebration, "2 years ago, I was dying alone. Now look at this." "Love always finds a way," Barbara replied. But one issue remained unresolved. Richard carried guilt for what he'd done. Despite his mother's forgiveness, he couldn't fully forgive himself. It was Howard who helped him in a frank conversation. "Son, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward. You chose the right path." "But I almost lost everything, Dad. I almost lost her." "Almost. But you didn't. And look at all the good that came from it." It was true. The community center now served over 200 seniors, families reconnected, friendships blossomed, lives were changed. On a special afternoon, Dorothy received an honor from the city council. The councilman gave an emotional speech. "This woman taught us that community is built with love and mutual care. That age is no limit to starting over." Dorothy stepped up to the podium, moved but determined. "I didn't do this alone. Every person here played a part in this story. Barbara and Mildred, who answered a cat's call. The neighbors who rallied. My son, who found his way back. Howard, who brought reconciliation. And Smokey, my little whiskered angel." The audience laughed and applauded. Smokey, in Richard's arms, meowed as if he understood. "If I've learned one thing," Dorothy continued, "it's that it's never too late to start again. Family is who we choose to love, and sometimes angels come in the form of a cat." Time kept passing, but now each day was a celebration. Dorothy woke up with purpose, surrounded by love. Richard and Sarah had a daughter, Emily. On the day she was born, Smokey stood guard at the door of the maternity room. "He's protecting the newest member of the family," said Dorothy proudly. Little Emily grew up with Smokey as her best friend. The cat, now elderly, was gentle and patient with the child. "They have a special connection," Sarah observed. It was true. When Emily cried, Smokey would appear, purring. When she began to crawl, he guided her away from danger. The Smokey House Center expanded. It now also offered daycare for the grandchildren of the elderly, creating a unique intergenerational space. Young and old together, learning from each other, Richard explained to visitors. This is how a community grows stronger. Barbara and Mildred coordinated the intergenerational activities. Children learned knitting from their grandmothers, the elderly shared stories, and everyone exchanged experiences. But time took its toll. Smokey, now nearly 15 years old, moved more slowly. He spent more time sleeping, always near Dorothy. "My old friend," she would say, stroking him. "You gave me more years of life." One winter morning, Smokey didn't come for breakfast. Dorothy found him sleeping peacefully in his bed, but he didn't respond to her calls. "He passed peacefully," the vet said. He lived a long and full life. Grief washed over everyone. Smokey wasn't just a cat. He was the symbol of everything they had built. His funeral was worthy of a hero. The whole neighborhood attended. Children drew pictures, the elderly shared stories of how the cat had comforted them. "He taught us about loyalty," Richard said, holding Emily, "about never giving up on those we love." They buried Smokey in the center's garden beneath a tree. A plaque read, "Smokey, the cat who saved a life and transformed a community." Dorothy cried, but they were tears of gratitude. "He fulfilled his mission. He gave me time to see all this flourish." Life went on as it always does. But Smokey's legacy remained. The center thrived, families stayed united, and the community grew stronger. Months later, on an ordinary morning, Emily tugged her grandmother to the garden. "Grandma, look. Under the tree where Smokey was buried, a grey cat was nursing kittens. She looked just like him." "It's a sign," Dorothy whispered. "Life always finds a way." They adopted the mother cat and one of the kittens. They named her Hope too, and the kitten knew. "The story continues," Barbara said, watching the cats play. And it did. Richard expanded the center's model to other neighborhoods. Sarah wrote a book about their experience. Howard moved permanently to Chicago. Dorothy lived to be 82, always sharp, always active. Her last words, before passing peacefully in her sleep, were, "Tell Smokey I'm coming. He'll be waiting for me." At Dorothy's funeral, hundreds of people came. Each had a story of how she had touched their lives. Richard, now a mature and wise man, gave the final speech. "My mother taught me that miracles happen when we open our hearts. It all started with a cat meowing at 11:42 p.m. That meow was a call to love, to community, to life. May we always hear those calls." Barbara and Mildred, now quite elderly, embraced. They had been instruments of something greater. "Every moment was worth it," Mildred said. "And to think we almost didn't go down that night," Barbara replied. The Smokey House Center became a national model. The story of how a cat saved a woman and transformed a community inspired similar projects across the country. Emily, now grown, took over the center's leadership. In her office, 2 photos held a place of honor: her grandmother Dorothy and Smokey. "They taught me that love knows no bounds," she would say to anyone who asked. "Not species, not age, not time." And so, what began as a mysterious meow in the early hours of the morning turned into a legacy of love and community that would span generations. Sometimes late at night, neighborhood residents swear they hear a meow at 11:42 p.m. They say it's Smokey, still watching over his community. True or not, the fact remains that that grey cat taught everyone a precious lesson: that love, when true, can move mountains, or at the very least, save lives and transform hearts. End of story. And what about you, dear listener? What did you think of Dorothy and Smokey's story? Have you ever had a pet that changed your life? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your experience. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories.